am Babita, a student of BA Honours in English from HCD University. In this video, I am going to discuss about the poem Refugee Mother and Child, which is written by Chinua Achebe. This assignment is part of my internal assessment, and the reason behind opting this poem because the significant part of the strength of the poem is the realization of how real it is. And this poem also talk about the suffering of refugees who were thrown out from their houses during political disturbances or natural calamities, and it also talk about the miserable condition of refugee of people in the refugee camp. I would like to thank my post-colonial subject teacher Professor Tushar for providing me such opportunity of making video lecture, whose valuable guidance has been the success. His suggestion and his instructions has served as the major contributor toward the completion of the lecture. In this lecture, I will cover all these topics which is visible on the screen. First, I will talk about post-colonialism, then about the poet Chinua Achebe, introduction of the poem, summary, figure of speech, and then at last we will discuss the theme of this poem. Refugee Mother and Child is written by Chinua Achebe, and he was a post-colonial writer. Now, the first question which arises here is, what is post-colonialism? It is the period of time after the colonialism in which the British Empire dominated many countries, and also a set of theories regarding art and culture dealing to colonialism problem. It also involves the discussion of experiences such as slavery, migration, suppression, resistance, difference, race, gender, and place. Before moving for any poem, it's very important to know about its poet first, so that we can understand their work with more clarification. Refugee Mother and Child is written by Chinua Achebe. He was a great Nigerian poet, critic, novelist, and short story writer. He was born in 1930 and died in 2013. He is most famous for his novel Things Fall Apart, which is published in 1958 and also translated into 45 languages. This novel depicts the pre-colonial life in the southeastern part of Nigeria and the invasion by Europeans during the late 19th century. And his poem Refugee Mother and Child is a celebration of motherhood. Now let's have a look on the introduction of this poem. Refugee Mother and Child was written during the Nigerian Civil War, an unfortunate aftermath of the colonialism that had influenced the area. The poet gives us a realistic picture of a mother and her child. Hundreds of poor peoples are thrown out of their homes due to political disturbances or natural calamities. The poem is simple but vivid description of the life of people who were stranded in refugee camps during turbulent time. In this poem, the pitiable state of such people is depicted evocatively, while strongly emphasizing on the unconditional love of a mother toward her child which knows no end. Now let's come to the summary of the poem Refugee Mother and Child. It is a poem composed by Chinua Achebe, depicting the destitution and starvation for displaced people. The poem is about a displaced person, mother, and her child who endure in the arms of neediness. In the long run, her child precises, and as a mother, she feels desperancy, upset, and vulnerable. In the poem, Achebe joined love, lament, religion, confidence, enduring, recollections, agony, and change into the lives of the outcast mom and child. Chinua Achebe expressed refugee mother and child as a reaction to his experienced childhood in neediness, with unprivileged kids and enduring and felt propelled by their psychological quality. All through the poem, Achebe drives us to a comprehension of mother's delicate love. It is a refugee camp somewhere in Africa,
And the poem starts with the poet comparing the scene of a mother holding her son in a refugee camp with the love and care which is usually depicted in all versions of Mary holding her young Jesus in her arms. The poet states that none of the reputed depictions of tenderness could even come near the fragility and beauty of the scene of pathos and heartbreak. There are multitudinous mothers and kids in the same hopeless condition in the exile camp, their youngster and gradually biting the dust of neediness and illness. Be that as it may, the point attract our consideration regarding a specific mother and her child. They are compared with Saint Mary holding baby Jesus in her arms. Madonna cherishes her youngster since Jesus is the guardian angel of humankind and the child of God. And the next four lines describe the aura of disease, illness, and death which surrounds the camp, describing the smells of the camp and the ribs of the children protruding from sickness, painting a truly horrifying picture of sick infant and helpless people. The mother knows her child is gradually dying. It is of no utilization looking after him. Different mothers in the camp knows this fact about their youngsters, thus they are indiscreet about their diminished kids. They would prefer not to additionally squander their chance and their vitality and love for the withering kids. It is purposeless for them, so they are latent. The air was substantial with smells of loose balls of unwashed youngsters. She doesn't need anything as an end result of her affection and forfeit, and she brushes his filthy hair left on the skull of his head. Um, uh, she um, she painstakingly parts the hair, or she is parting his hair as though she was sitting him up to his schools toward the beginning of the day. She is completing a ton of work, including kissing his temple. It was a demonstration of placing blooms in his little pine box, the last love of a mother to her child. The writer utilizes the word ghost and rust as illustration of death. The mother continues grinning while at the same time brushing his hair, since she realized that soon the child will pass on, while uh, conveying baby Jesus in her arms. Saint Mary, too, knows well that her child will be nailed to the cross for the advantage of humankind. Subsequently, he would turn into the hero of humanity. The Ebuke mother can't accept anything as an end result of her forfeit and maternal love for her poor, debilitated youngster. Still, her adoration and watch over him till his final gasp. If we talk about the literal analysis of the work, the poem outlines the undying affection and confidence one mother empathetically hold with her child. The artist demonstrates to us the picture of starvation and destitution that displaced people are compelled to confront. The title of the poem emits the underlying impression that the poem centers on displaced people, one who escaped to look for shelter. The life of evac youngster that their folk, their sentiments, their feeling and their agony. For a son she soon would have to forget. This hint her child is kicking the bucket and she would need to overlook him to adjust to her grievous misfortune. No reason is offered with respect to why the general population are in displaced person camp. Maybe there had been a war or some kind of common catastrophe, yet Achibe has a props portrayed how such radically the loves of those change who are compelled to leave their home and take protect by concentrating on one mother who is holding her diminishing child. Now here are some figure of speech which is used in the poem Refugee Mother and Child. The first one is personification, then alliteration, imagery, and at the last one is imagery. Now let's start with the first one, which is personification. What is personification? The representation of an abstract quality in human form. For example, which is used in the poem is singing in her eyes. The poet gives the human like attribute of singing to the mother's eye. The singing in her eyes is referring to the mother trying to avoid feeling sad. As she comforts her son, she refrains from crying in order to allow her son to remember happiness instead of death. The next is alliteration. The repetition of initial consonant sound in two or more neighboring words is known as alliteration. For example, son, she, soon. Here, the S sound is repeated thrice. Another example is steps behind blonde empty bellies. The B sound is repeated thrice. So, it can be the example of alliteration. Now, next come on the figure of speech of imagery. What is it? It is a figurative language that evokes a mental image or other kind of sense impression. For example, by using the image of Mother Mary and her child Jesus, poet highlights the love of a mother towards her child in the poem, as their image is universally accepted as the ultimate portrait of motherly love. Then in next paragraph, the poet uses words like unwashed, washed out ribs, dried up bottoms, labored steps, blonde empty bellies, give the reader a clear picture of the helpless state of the children in the refugee camp. And now the next line which is used in the poem is rust colored hair on his skull shows and make it evident that the boy is on the verge of death. His hair seems to be rusting and his skulls can be seen. Last but not the least is contrast. What is contrast? Contrast is a difference between two ideas or thought. A quote which is used in the poem is most mothers there had long ceased to care, but not this one. This quote shows the contrast of this refugee mother and other mother who might live in countries where the suffering is not currently taking place. And the semicolon emphasizes this contrast because it joins the two ideas of refugee mother compared with other mothers who are more fortunate.
Now let's conclude the lecture. Refugee Mother and Child depict a possible true life of story of Chinua Achebe. His reflections upon the persona's depth of the love for her child demonstrate qualities of strength, love and hope through desperate times. The mood of this poem was intense. In regard to refugee mother and child, the mother showed sign of patience, love and great strength under extreme circumstances in which she could not surpass. Most refugee camps in Nigeria are overpopulated, filled with civilians and who fled their city for safety. Meanwhile, at the refugee camp, resources become scarce due to overpopulation. Therefore, most of the refugees fall under hard times. Achebe was an artist, revolutionary and visionary who showed everyone who read his article, poem and novel true suffering of a nation.